It took me a long time, and again, this is me, a long time to even say I'm a composer. I think the other thing, and this is something I've thought about a lot recently, I have difficulty seeing myself in situations. I have always had this feeling of no one would be interested. I don't see myself doing that. I don't see myself being asked to do that. Thinking back to the listening lists that we had, there must have been a couple of women on it, but I don't remember it. So I'm sitting there with this listening list for the composition class as well as 20th century music, and I can't see myself on that list. I can't see myself doing that. And so I think it was this underlying feeling that fed into my own personality of, well, you really don't know how to do this. You really, yeah, go on and do what you know what to do. You know how to teach. You can do that. You've been doing that for a while quite successfully. You know, you can perform. You're doing that quite successfully. So there was this element of, I don't know how to do this. And of not feeling capable, as opposed to being encouraged to learn how to do it. I think there was this attitude, and it might be my reading of the attitude, that you know, you're sort of born knowing how to do it, as opposed to it being something you learn, which is crazy. But so I decided I'm here in the middle of wherever, nowhere, that I will just try my hand at writing. I really had this feeling of there was a real push to be cutting edge, to do new things, to do this sort of thing. And I really came out of it feeling like, oh, I'm not creative enough. And I confess sometimes when I've been writing, you know, when you've got a program, you have to write the bio, and I write my bio, and I read some of them, and I studied with so-and-so, and I did this, and I studied, and I went, and I look and I go, and I feel like writing, I write music and it's really fun. Just leaving it at that.
Before we continue with the interview, I would like to ask you to do something that's really quick and really easy, and that is to subscribe to my channel, or if you're listening on Spotify, to follow the podcast. You can also like individual videos and rate individual episodes, and obviously leave comments. It would really help boost the algorithm and make sure that our valuable conversations with these incredible composers are shared with more people. Hi, Diane. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a privilege for me to get to interview and talk to composers such as yourself. And what I love to do is to get to know a bit of your origin story. How did you get to where you are today? What brought you to composition? And I know that this is a particularly exciting topic for you because composition is not what you have always done, if I'm correct in saying that. Shall we just start at the beginning? What got you into music initially?
I loved music from a very young child. My mother talked about when I was about 2 or so. If music was on, I was moving, and I have been thinking about this a lot because it's not even just the love of music; it's the desire to create it or to make it, to play it, to not just listen. Because a lot of members of my family love music, love listening, but I don't think any of them had that desire to do it. And that came again from a very young age. My sister's 5 years older than I am, and my parents got a piano, actually through my grandfather who sold pianos with the Heinzman Company. And my sister, yeah, you know, she sort of was okay with it. But one of the things she said recently was that she could get away with not practicing very much because she would just show me stuff because I would stand there and I would want to do it. And she said it was great, you know, here, Diane, do this. So it always been a part of my life and always been a passion, and playing has always been a passion. As a teenager, I switched to flute to play in the band. And it was kind of a side thing. It was like, oh yeah, this is fun, and you're playing with people, which as a pianist, as you know, is a little harder to do. You're by yourself a lot more. I did compose while I was a teenager. I did the songwriting thing, I did some instrumental work, and went into university thinking that I would pursue composition, that it had been my plan. This was the late 70s, very late 70s. And I was also a very, maybe still am, a shy kid, which is a little surprising for someone who might like being a performer. Shy, not necessarily a lot of confidence. And so when it came to actually studying, I did a year of composition. I was at York University in Toronto. It just, I really had this feeling of there was a real push to be cutting edge, to do new things, to do this sort of thing. And I really came out of it feeling like, oh, I'm not creative enough. I'm not, that's just, yeah, I'm going to pursue the performance, which I love, and teaching, which I do, which I love, and kind of put it aside and really had this feeling of, it's not for me, it's not me. Looking back, it's a little odd because I went on to teach preschool music. And you have to be pretty darn creative to teach preschool music, but there it is. In I've moved around a lot, and my husband and I ended up in Smithers, British Columbia, in the early '90s with two young kids. And I went into Smithers thinking it's a very small town. It's a town of 5,000 in northern British Columbia, and I went in thinking we went because of my husband's job, and I said, "Oh, okay, what am I going to do? As a musician." And it turns out that music is really amazing in Smithers. And we arrived in January, and in May, I was playing with a trio of two flutes and a violin. And one has to remember that this is before the internet when music was readily available. So we would, have to order down from Vancouver and trying to find things. There was nothing for two flutes and a violin. It was all three flutes or three violins. And so I decided I'm here in the middle of wherever, nowhere, that I will just try my hand at writing. And there was no pressure. There was no, it has to be a certain way. The only criteria I had is I had to like it, and my colleagues had to like it enough to play it, or at least to try it. They were amazing. And I still say that they're responsible because after that, I've just gotten into it more and more. I did a lot of writing for the trio, but then started to expand writing for other instruments and combinations and chamber music. And studied a bit when we moved down to Victoria. I studied a bit with Lorna Patterson, and any workshops I could get, any opportunities I could get. I've also studied a bit with, and still do off and on when I have something I'm working on with Janet Danielson. Coming to Victoria, I met a lot of other composers, a lot of other women, actually, mostly women composers, who were incredibly supportive and encouraging. And yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Wow, okay. I have so many questions. So, a lot to
Oh God,
unpack.
that was a long time. Oh no.
No,
Just
no,
used
this is brilliant. I felt like I should have kept a notepad on the side to write down all my questions, but I hope I remember them. Can we rewind all the way back? So I'm fascinated that your family was actually somehow set up in a very musical way. If your grandfather sold pianos, how
my
did he get into that, and is that how you got to know the piano as a sort of familiar instrument?
Well, it's kind of a funny story, and there's been a lot of in this process of going back to York, as I was talking about, because that's where my family's from. My grandfather's father, my great grandfather, was actually a prosperous farmer and raised horses, and but he was also really musical. And he sang in they were Methodist. He sang in the churches. When they came to Canada, he conducted a choir in Ontario, a church choir that was the best in the county in the 10 years he was doing that. My grandfather, as far as I know, from what my mother said, could only play enough chords to sell a piano, which I don't know for sure. I think I don't know how he met how he got into working with the Heinzman Company and selling pianos. I suspect there was that he knew something about it. He had that connection. He could play enough chords to make it sound good, and it was really when, but my father's mother was a singer and insisted that he take piano lessons, and he took some, but he found ways to not do much in a half hour of practicing. But both my parents felt it was important to give us the exposure. And with me, as I said, with me, it was let me at it. And so I think when they felt my sister was old enough, that they basically went to my grandfather and said, we would like a piano. And so he went and he found them a used piano, and I'm in my studio, and it's sitting just over there. It's just,
What kind of
it's,
piano
yeah,
is that?
it's a Heinzmann, built in 1933, I think. Yeah, so it has had some work done on it, but it's lovely. It's lovely to play, and it has that connection. Yeah, so it's interesting that the idea of having your kids study music was important to my family, predominantly my father's side, but I think my father loved music, and I think my mother, that was, he introduced her to a lot that she hadn't heard before. She ended up being quite a music lover as well, so they felt it was important, and I think we're a little surprised, a little taken aback but very supportive at my desire to pursue music and to get at it very seriously. And they also always felt that if I was going to become a teacher, which I do love, that there would always be work, that you would always find students. Now it's interesting; it's a little harder now than it was. But at that point in my career, it's less of an issue. But
Yeah. So really it was from both sides of your parents that there was musical influence, musical backgrounds, even though albeit quite different, but there was that impetus to see music as something important in your life. I think it's also beautiful. You said your parents were very supportive of your decision to pursue it in such a serious way, because oftentimes, no matter what national context, what time in history, oftentimes it's like, oh, we want you to study, but we want you to study only so you're okay. We don't actually want you to pursue it seriously. But when you decided to study music at York University, they sort of expected it, or did it come as a surprise to them that this was going to be your focus? Had they imagined something else for you, do you think?
no, I think had I pursued, and I did at one point consider other things, and I think they were thinking, no, you know what you want to do. You should go do it. And I'm not sure they ever actually said that to me, but that was the vibe I got. They were very supportive. It was like, we know this is your passion. We know that you're good at it. You should do it. And I was very grateful, because I know that there are a lot of families that would look at it in terms of, it's not very practical. You really, think of something that's going to earn you a living and earn you a good job. And they I think they would have been surprised had I actually gone another route.
Do you remember your first concert as a budding pianist, or what was it like for you growing up, sort of the musical child?
It's really interesting, because I wanted to be a performer, and yet at the same time I wasn't necessarily very good at it. Particularly as this is really interesting too, particularly as a pianist. And that's still true. If I get asked to play piano in public, I sort of go, oh, I don't know. If you ask me to play flute in public, it's like, oh yeah, I'm there. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but I don't remember my first concert. I was probably pretty young. I was probably 6 or 7. I remember, I do remember a number of them though, because my teacher had a lot of students. This was the baby boomer years, really just towards the end. And she would have her recitals on the top floor of the Heinzmann building, downtown Toronto, in June. Now, Toronto in June can be like it is, today, and gray and rainy, or it can be really, really hot and muggy. And there were a number of those recitals that what I actually remember is sitting, waiting for my turn to play, in this hot and muggy place. Just think and sitting there thinking, I hope we go for ice cream after this. It's like, oh yeah.
I hope your parents did take you for ice cream afterwards.
Oh, they were really good about that. Yeah, yeah. In fact, it's still the crazy thing is, I will still do something like that after a performance. So I'm older now, and sometimes it's actually out for a drink or a glass of wine.
Adult ice cream, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful. And then you also said you were already composing as a teenager. Was that sort of coinciding with you starting to play the flute as well in band?
It it was about the same. It was about the same time. In junior high, which would be in grade seven. Um, they those were the years that there was a strong music program, and you went around and you got to try strings, and you got to try band, and you got to try vocal. I wasn't interested in strings, and in band I was playing clarinet, and it was a lot like recorder, and it was like, but the vocal teacher was very much into not just singing. She was into experimental stuff, how music related. As a class, we did an animated film where we did drew on all the little cells, and we put together this film, and I was really excited about that. And my mother at the time went, "Oh, I don't know. You should do band." And I didn't. I did vocal. And then a friend of my sister's and I don't know where he got it, but he gave me a flute that didn't have a head joint. And he basically said, "I can't do anything with this. Why don't you take it and, you're really musical. Why don't you just do something with, find it." So we went out, we found a head joint, and I started playing flute. Quite liked it. Popped into band even though I had missed it, but I had enough, I could read music. One of the things about coming from piano, reading music for flute is there's only one line. It's like easy, I don't have to read two at
Indeed.
once. So I started playing flute, and I loved playing in band, but I still pursued it in terms of it sort of felt like a sideline to me. And I still pursued life as a pianist and did my first year at Queen's actually as a pianist. And because that was my major, I hadn't managed to make it a double major with flute. I found that I really missed playing flute, and that I didn't. I like playing piano, but there's a lot of, as master classes in those performance situations, which I really didn't like very much. And so this is partly where I had this conversation with myself. Do I want to pursue music? Maybe I do want to look at something else. I ended up switching to York University, staying with music, and becoming a flute major. And I said, I want to do this is where I'm comfortable. This is where I belong. At the same time, a friend of mine pulled me into the reserve band, the military. It was actually Air Force Reserves, and which is a great way to earn extra money when you're in university. But the other thing that happened with that is when you're playing with the reserve band, the band is playing all the time. You're playing and is performing all the time. They're performing for military dinners. We were playing at the Canadian Exhibition when I first joined. We were playing at the Canadian Exhibition 4 times a week for 3 weeks. By the time you do that many performances, it's like, okay, we missed that. I made a mistake there. I didn't. It's like, oh, I'll get it next time. Or I did it the time before, so we're okay. So I it helped me get over that performance thing. That I was just doing it enough that I began to feel much more comfortable, and I'm much more comfortable on flute than piano.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. So we are now in your university years. So you switched from Queen's to York University, not University of York.
Yes, I
And
know it gets a little confusing.
you said something really fascinating before. You said you were also doing a bit of composition there, but you felt you weren't creative enough because the atmosphere there was very much like, oh, you have to be cutting edge. And how was that? Like, can you describe this kind of atmosphere? What were the composition teachers like? Your peers who were also doing composition, what created this sense of like, oh, you have to be the most out there.
The teachers were pretty good, but it wasn't a one-on-one. It was a class. Looking back, even it was a fairly large class. I mean, obviously not hundreds or I think there was probably about 20, 25 in the class. There were two professors. They were both really nice, but they tended not to, the feedback tended to be pretty terse or pretty, how would I, the one I can think, I got one back and said, you should develop these ideas more. And some people would have gone and said, so how do you do that? How do I do that? But I was a pretty shy and not very self-confident, so I kind of went, how do I do that? I don't know how to do that. And sort of went through this process of well, I don't know how to do this, so yeah. And, they went through the various 20th century styles. And at no point did we really write anything or be asked to write anything from before that, or in any style that might actually have been a chance to explore how do you develop an idea with a kind of musical language that you're more used to. Again, because this is the 70s, this is the late 70s, it sort of hasn't, I mean, it was hard even to hear recordings of stuff. I think the other thing, and this is something I've thought about a lot recently, I have difficulty seeing myself in situations. For instance, if, how do I say this? As a composer being interviewed, I have always had this feeling of no one would be interested. I don't see myself doing that. I don't see myself being asked to do that. And so I guess, again, maybe just not imaginative enough. I don't know. But it was, again, also a time thinking back to the listening lists that we had. There must have been a couple of women on it, but I don't remember it. So I'm sitting there with this listening list for the composition class as well as 20th century music, and I can't see myself on that list. I can't see myself doing that. And so I think it was this underlying feeling that fed into my own personality of, well, you really don't know how to do this. You really, yeah, go on and do what you know what to do. You know how to teach. You can do that. You've been doing that for a while quite successfully. You can perform. You're doing that quite successfully. So there was this element of, I don't know how to do this. And of not feeling capable, as opposed to being encouraged to learn how to do it. I think there was this attitude, and it might be my reading of the attitude, that you know, you're sort of born knowing how to do it, as opposed to it being something you learn, which is crazy. But yeah.
That's so interesting that you said that. A couple of things. I mean, first of all, not feeling represented in the existing canon that you're studying, not seeing yourself on that page. That's such a powerful thing. And I think to a degree we are still dealing with that, especially within the Western classical canon. I know people are working on it, but it still perpetuates very much this myth of the lonely genius who is usually a white European man. And it skews our view of history because obviously women have composed, written, produced music at every point in history. And it's just how music history has been written that has somehow twisted our understanding of things. It's also interesting that that you said you felt you needed to stick with what you knew, and somehow I feel like the two are related. Sort of this idea of like, oh, composition is something you're born being able to do, and again, this relates to this genius trope of like, oh, it's just an innate ability that sort of is expelled from your innermost. I don't know.
You write it down from your brain. You
Yes.
just, now, the interesting thing is I made up songs as a kid that I would just sing to myself something, and I think at times would roll her eyes. But I would, sing, but that was that day's song, and I would just forget it. I never thought about writing it down. And then I would just go on to the next, make something else up the next day. So it was always in there. It was always in me, but it never, never got encouraged or recognized, or I never said anything. My mom knew because that's what I was doing, but I don't think I ever, I think I told my piano teacher by the time I was a teenager, and I was actually starting to doing some. But I don't think she had had an inkling before that.
Yeah. What was the atmosphere like though when you were studying in that composition class? In so it was a group setting. Was there somewhat of a gender balance among the students? Were the professors men or women?
I don't know if there were others that felt like me. I wasn't. I don't think I had never talked to anybody about it. The class was predominantly men. The two professors were men. So yeah, that again, that reinforcement. They were, they were lovely, but there also was an attitude again, and I one of the things about attitude, I think, is it's not just the attitude, but the perception of it. And so we're dealing with, I mean, what I'm really talking about is my perception, and I don't know how accurate that is. But there was a feeling that, I mean, these two professors were composers. One was a performer as well. This was their introductory class. And I think that there was a feeling of, well, here, we'll do this class, but, it's like if you decide to go on, then I'll be interested in what you do. That it was like, oh, this is all very interesting, and you're learning and you're doing your assignments, and that's good, and I'll give you my comments. There was never follow up. There was never, okay, you've got it this far. Here's some ideas to take it forward to do. It was always like, okay, we're done that assignment, it's gone. So the atmosphere was I practical comes to mind, though in some ways that's not very practical. Almost like a math assignment type situation that it's like you did the assignment, it's done, you've maybe learned from it, let's go on to the next assignment. And maybe that was just the way the class was set up. That was because it was an introductory. We don't want to get into details, we're just introducing it. I don't know how many people, and by this time you're looking at a third year course in a 4-year program. And I don't know how many people went on. I wasn't incredibly close to my classmates either in my year. Just the ones I played chamber music with were the ones I got to know better. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think the environment which fosters or fails to foster compositional creativity makes a huge difference. And if you get that support and encouragement, especially at a young age, I think it makes or breaks your willingness to suffer continuously for your art. But eventually you did come back to composition, and it sounds like it was almost out of a kind of situational necessity also that you started to write a lot more again. Or were you already thinking like, oh, actually, I feel like I should go back to composing, and this was just the opportunity?
I played with it a few times, and I toyed with it, but I had, again, it was sort of, where am I putting my toe in the water? It's like, how cold is this going to be? And it really was situational in terms of, this is the ideal situation to do it. This is the trio itself. The three of us were also doing a lot of arrangements, again, because necessity. Or our violinist would say, oh yeah, we have short attention spans. We always want new music. So I think it was a mix. It was an idea I played with and sort of thought of doing and toyed a little bit. I played with a guitarist and did a couple of small things that kind of feeling it out. But I think it was a combination of me being ready and the situation that, again, it was worth trying out because we were doing that in terms of arrangements. The three of us, I knew that I was in a comfortable situation to do that. That if I came and said, and I did, obviously, put music on their stands and say, okay, can we try this? I wrote this. Is this okay? that the reception I would get would be what I got. Very warm. We played it through once, and it was like, oh my God. Oh, yeah, no, just maybe I should just, yeah, no, it was all over the place. And they both said, no, we should try this again. So, okay, we'll try it again. Well, the second time through is obviously much better. And we played together. I lived there for 8 years, but we continued to play after I moved down to Victoria. And we still played together, and we played for close to 20 years. And that first piece, we played a lot of the time. If we were doing a concert, so it was often included. And it's really interesting. There was one tricky spot that perhaps if I had more experience in composition wouldn't have been quite so tricky, but I wasn't going to go back and fix it. And it remained the tricky spot. Every time we pulled it out and hadn't played it for a while, it was like, oh, that spot again.
Which composition is that? Which is the first one?
It was actually, my very first one was called Ravens. Recording it does exist, actually. And I probably should post it somewhere because it actually works, I think. It's actually a pretty cool piece. When I've gotten on and done other things and been doing other stuff, I've often blamed them. Yeah, yeah, it's your fault I'm a composer. It's your fault I'm doing this. Because, if you had said not to, after that first time, if you had said, oh yeah, no, we're not doing this, then that would have been it.
Well, I'm glad they didn't discourage you, but gave you almost a space to workshop ideas, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. In some ways, it was that situation of the three of us. It's one of the tightest chamber groups I've ever played with, and right from the beginning. And it was the chance that I think a lot of composers don't always get a chance where you can write a piece, walk in, finish finish the draft on a Sunday, walk into a rehearsal Wednesday and say, can we try this? And have the musicians say, oh yeah, yeah, here we go. And then to go back and be able to work it through, to also know the musicians well enough to know what the end product might be, how the musicians relate to each other. One of the things I was really bad at for a long time, particularly when I moved out of writing for the trio, was putting some details in like dynamics and I mean, oh God, even articulation, just because we did so much of that as a trio instinctively. It's like, I knew what we would do because we would do it, because that was the way we worked. And so it was when I was having to write for other people who wouldn't necessarily get those things, I had to suddenly go, oh God, I got to write this in. Lorna Patterson was great that way with me because she would go, okay, there's not enough information here. They might want some dynamics. I was like, okay. And now I probably put in way more than I need to, but the way it is.
It almost makes me think of sort of 18th century composers who where the score was really more of a suggestion and the performers either both knew what they were doing, but then also it was expected that they sort of improvise a little bit themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very nice. How do you approach these things nowadays? You say you're now putting a lot of information into your score. How do you imagine your relationship with your future performers, or how do you convey your ideas of interpretation, or are you just happy for performers to be like, oh, this is the score, I'm gonna do with it whatever I think is right?
It's actually a mix. I want to give them a lot of information so that they aren't going, well, what about? Yeah, so that they have the confidence that what they're doing is close to my vision, or at least what I'm thinking. I'm a real writer of program notes. And it's like, just this is what I'm thinking. This is where the idea came from. This is what I'm thinking. It goes along. And so I give them a lot of information, but at the same time, I'm happy to let it go. That once I'm done, once I figure I'm done the piece, when it's sort of like when I've sat in on readings and stuff, I often find myself going, oh wow, that sounds really good. Okay, fine. Do you have a question? And I know other composers will sit there, well, this bar such and such needs to be this, and bar such and I sort of have this feeling. It's like, okay, I've done my part. Go.
A division of labor.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I also feel that the performer will bring something else to it. The performer will bring something, their own experience, their own thoughts, and that makes the music alive. I think that's important, and I think it's important to, and maybe this is because I'm a performer, to also sort of go, yeah, go with it. What are you thinking? How do you see this? And I'm happy with it. I don't think I've ever been really disappointed with a performance There are one or two I wasn't as happy with, but I think that tended to be lack of rehearsal on the performer's part. And usually because, and again, as a performer, I know that sometimes you just can't, that you just, the circumstances are just not, you just don't have the time to put in, particularly chamber ideas. Like you can do your part, but trying to do that communication and what are you doing and how are they interrelating, that takes more time and you don't always have it as a performer.
I guess it makes sense for you as a performer to then also trust that the individual's performer's agency will suffice to do your music justice in a way.
Yeah, and I've been really lucky too, because when I've had works played, it's generally been really good performers that have been playing it, and even if they aren't professionals, but happen to be really good performers, quite often too that there is often this desire on the performer's part, which is a change from when I was a student in university, but the performers really want to do a good job. They really want to get into, what's this about? What do I do? That the performers I've worked with anyway, both amateur, I know the amateurs that are just as good as professionals, professional or not, often bring to it that enthusiasm, that desire to work, that interest, and they want to do as good a job as they can. And that means a lot, because I also, again, as a performer in the late 70s, there was definitely pushback from performers to anything new,
Oh,
to new
really?
music. I remember it was with the wind ensemble, or a small part of the wind ensemble. We did a piece by Varese, which included tape. In those days, it was tape. It was like reel to reel. And there was another flutist there were two of us, I was playing second flute, and he just grumbled the whole time that he was having, and I know that there was grumbling among other members that why are we doing this? This is stupid. This isn't music. It's just, and, and I did kind of think at the time, it's like, yeah, some of it works, some of it doesn't work, but, you know, try it out and will it work? So I think there's a much better reception among performers to do new music, to find something new, to try things out. I think that's been a real benefit over the last number of years.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. That doesn't mean that there aren't still those who sort of suspiciously gaze at anything with extended techniques, but yeah.
Fair enough. Well, as a pianist too, there's the other part of, I am not putting weird stuff in my piano. I'm sorry. It's like, yeah, you know.
Not my own piano, but someone else's. I'll happily do all the extended techniques. In our brief email conversation leading up to the interview today, you also mentioned that sometimes you feel like, because you, I guess, technically didn't formally study composition, although it sounds like you actually did, at least to a degree, you feel sort of either overlooked, or you feel like that it's, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Does that make you feel like it somehow has at points hindered you in your work as a composer, or what impact does that have for you that you don't hold a, I don't know, bachelor, master's, PhD in composition?
Um,
Or maybe it doesn't matter.
some of it matters in terms of how I've sometimes viewed myself. It took me a long time, and again, that this is me, a long time to even say I'm a composer. It was after I moved down to Victoria, we were having a luncheon, and it was celebrating Canada Music Week. It was the teachers' luncheon, and the Victoria branch at that point had a number of composers, one, two, three, four, five, seven, six or seven, and they were doing this speech. And, oh, how many of our composers are here? And they were all, and I was sort of going, and somebody nudged me. I remember I can't remember who I was sitting with. Who nudged me and went, "Put your hand up." So I've always felt like I'm not of that group, and I think at times it has, because I has maybe hasn't given me that edge that sometimes is there when you have to supply your CV, you have to supply, here's what you've done. I also think that there's some of the things, the opportunities that you get as a composition student that just aren't available to you when you're not in that milieu and you're older. This is the other thing. So I think that there's been some limitations that way, just because, when they have all of these applicants for something that they have to weed out, because you can't pick everyone. That I think there are times when, it's like, well, pretty good, but doesn't have the academic background, or doesn't have the, we don't, I guess, I don't know if she can do, I suspect I've been occasionally in the weeding out process because of that. I can't say that for sure. It's kind of a mixture of things. I think at times I think it would be nice to go back and study, but I'm also feeling, yeah, I'm getting on. Do I want to
But
do that?
would you, if you were to go back and study, would that be mainly so you have sort of the official accreditation of a degree, or is there something you would be excited about as part of the studying process?
I think it's a mixture. I think it's for the same reason I've been. I don't know if Janet would let me call it official, but studying with Janet is that I find myself going, I don't know what to do next. I'm working on this piece, and I don't know if what I'm doing is working. If that this is what, and wanting to go, feeling like I don't have quite the skills that I want to have, or quite the probably the skills, or the variety of ideas, or the ability to, I don't know, think beyond or something. So going back to study would be beneficial in that sense as well. And I'm also not sure how many opportunities it really would, like, thinking about it really practically, would it give me that many more opportunities? It's a bit of an elusive thing, I think, because again, you don't know how it came out in the mix. You don't know if the person who's looking at it, what their opinions are, because you can have the opposite opinion. You can, someone can say, "Oh no, we've just studied too much. It's just, it's like no ideas from outside, no ideas from different experience. It's just, And I confess sometimes when I've been writing, when you've got a program, you have to write the bio, and I write my bio, and I read some of them, and I studied with so and so, and I did this, and I studied, and I went, and I look and I go, and I feel like writing. I write music, and it's really fun. Just leaving it at that.
I love that.
I have this list. Yeah, I can make it up. Do you want me to make it up? Yeah. So it's. I guess it is what it is. And there are times I think we all at times go, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or I should have done that differently. But you end up where you end up, and what you do with it, I suppose, is part of it.
Yeah, you mentioned age, which I find really fascinating, especially in classical music, where we have this interesting dynamic of celebrating this wunderkind ideal of the child genius, I guess. But then, what if you grow out of that? What if you're too old to be a wunderkind? Then, especially also as women, I think once you reach a certain age, society views you differently at various stages of various ages, and then how that interacts with your career in music, with your position on the stage as a composer. Have you experienced age in music in a significant way?
It's interesting. I've often thought of myself as being unique in a way, because I started later in life, and I really wasn't a wonderkind in any sense, other than being passionate about it, and dedicated to it. I've had a couple of students, one in particular, who was just amazing, and just, got it like that. And there were a couple of things I learned from that. And one of the ones is, at age 7, his piano would play the Bach Minuet in G, and it would play, and so he learned how to play it. Not having had, like, on his third lesson, he came in and said, "Can I play this for you?" And he played it, and I just went, "Oh." But he had spent and I talked to his mom, and he had spent an entire Saturday working on it. He'd stopped for lunch, and that was the only thing. So I think this idea that you're born with it, or you're, again, coming back to that. I think I think a number of women come to composition late. That it's not, at least in my generation. I don't know if that will continue to be the process. Again, we do other things. We're viewed differently, and I think one of the struggles is that there's so many opportunities for younger composers. That the number of times you go through, you've got these, apply for this, contribute to this score, do this, whatever, and you have to have been born after 2001 or whatever it is these days, or you have to be younger than 36, or you have to, it's very common. It's still happening. Are we want to work with young composers, or it's stretched a little bit over the years. I've been doing this into emerging composers. Well, I still come up with a question of how do you define an emerging composer? I have about myself, I feel like I am always going to be an emerging composer. I don't think I'll ever be emerged. I don't think I will ever. And how do you define that? How do you? And I think some of these organizations, they don't want to do a time limit or an age limit, but they need to limit it somehow. And so you get to decide yourself whether you're emerging or not. But I have a little trouble with that as well. So I think I've definitely run into missed opportunities, or opportunities I haven't qualified for because of the way my musical path has been. It is changing. The interesting thing is the International Alliance for Women in Music, their prizes for new, or their awards for new music, a number of them have minimum ages. And the minimum age might be 40, or the minimum age might be 50. And the idea being that I think this is predominantly, not exclusively, because I know an example of a man who's a brilliant composer who started, I guess, in his 40s, maybe earlier, but same age I am, and I know he started later. But I think it's something that happens often to women, and I think the idea was that we want to make something that recognizes that. The award that the Association for Canadian Women Composers is running, and I can't write the name. Oh no, China will get mad at me. Roberta Stevens Award, and it has a minimum age. So you can't, and I think the minimum age might be 36, but it's that same idea that it's for a woman who is older in an earlier part of her career, and I think it's something that we're starting to deal with and starting to recognize, but it's hard to get out of that. It's hard to get out of that. Look at this amazing prodigy. Interesting aspect is my father was a psychologist and was actually quite interested, particularly after he retired and as the science changed, he was quite interested in, I suppose you could think of neuroscience, how the brain works and that kind of thing, and was interested, as I have been, in the relationship of the brain to music. And I think that when we talk about talent and the prodigies, that what it really is, it's brain wiring, which it's not quite as, I mean, it's magical in its own way, but it's not really magical. It's got a practical basis, and that doesn't mean we should ignore it or not do anything about it or not recognize it or encourage it. It's not this big magical thing, but it has, at least in my belief, it has a biological, physical place it comes from.
And also, if you don't put in the work, you can have all the potential you want. It's not going to result in anything.
Exactly. And I've also known people for whom it came very easy as they were children and did really well, and music came very easy, and quit once it got a little bit hard, which it does. At some point, it's going to be hard. Whereas those students where it was always kind of hard, then when they get the harder part, well, it's just harder. And I know how to deal with that. I know I just have to work on it. And I think the persistence is a big part of it too.
Mm. The other thing I wanted to ask you about that you mentioned at the very beginning is that through meeting a lot of other women composers, you felt very inspired and also encouraged to keep pursuing composition.
Yeah. a lot of the women, mostly in Victoria, mostly in the Teachers Association. Um, probably the first one, I was still in Smithers, and I had gotten into this process of submitting scores, and it was one that they were this summer school. It was actually the summer school that had it, and I submitted a piece, and it won. I think it was the first one I ever won. But the thing I liked about it, why I was happy to enter no matter what the result was, because you got an adjudication. And the adjudication I got for that performance, or for that piece, was from Lorna Patterson, who whose name was familiar because she'd written a lot of student pieces. A lot of her pieces were in the books that my students were using and playing out of. And that was just before we moved down to Victoria. So when I moved down to Victoria, I contacted her and said, I loved your adjudication. It felt really helpful. It didn't feel like I was going to have trouble with my self-confidence. I didn't say it this way, but if I went to study with her, it wouldn't be something that it would boost my self-confidence, as opposed to my walking out feeling like I can't do this. I've been there. I don't want to go there again. So I started studying with Lorna. She was great. She was amazing. But of course, Lorna was a member of the Teachers Association. So she actually said, you need to meet Joan Hanson. You need to go meet Joan Hanson. Joan Hanson, again, wrote a lot of student works. She was a teacher, member of the Teachers Association. She has written other stuff. She was an amazing composer, but she was also. So I, in fact, she called me. Lorna said, told Joan, you need to meet this new composer. She's studying with me. So Joan said, come and have tea, and she actually lived within walking distance. So I went down and had tea, and she was delightful. Joan, as a personality, was just laughed a lot. One of the biggest memories I have of Joan is her laughing. But she accepted right away that, of course, I was a composer. Lorna said I was a composer. I'm a composer. And supported me in so many ways. She had been doing some adjudication for a number of years, and hit a year, and she said, I don't think I can do it this year, but I've told the organizer that they should ask you. And I'm going, what? But she said, no, and if you need help, I'll help you out. You do the adjudication. So that was fine. It worked well. I actually really enjoyed doing it. She introduced me to Sylvia Rickard, who is a composer here. Sylvia was amazing, again, right from the beginning. Of course you are, and you should do this. And Sylvia was the one who said, you need to apply to the Canadian Music Centre. And at this point, there really were a bunch of, you need to do this, you need to be a professional, you need to have this education. They had this long list of what you needed to be an associate composer. And I'm going, oh, no, I don't have that. She said, nope, you need to apply. Okay, so I did. And I got accepted. And whereas I wouldn't have applied without Sylvia. Sylvia introduced me to Leela Lustig, who's a good friend. And all of them, just when I met them, they immediately accepted that I was a composer. It was no question, and have been very supportive of things that I've done. I've also been able to play music of theirs, which has been great. Yeah, so it's just been this little network, and I feel like I owe a lot to these women, and that attitude of course you can, and of course you are, that really made a difference, and it made a difference much more than people might think. So I find myself as well, again, meeting women who are perhaps later in life and kind of wanting to try their hand at composition, or have an idea. I find myself going, okay, I had this wonderful experience of support. I need to turn around and give it back. And so I find myself, as much as possible, going, yeah, of course you can do it. Let me help. What can you do? And it's one of those funny, subtle things, I think, that we don't think about. in terms of having, how do you encourage people to do probably any of the creative arts, because it's so personal, because it's so, whenever you do a performance, create a painting, do a dance, do any of those art forms, you're putting yourself into it, into that art. You're also putting yourself out there. It also means you can be really vulnerable. And I think one of the best things you can do to encourage that is just to support that, to say, of course you can, and not try and judge the results. At some point you might want to, but make sure that it's not the person and that they're encouraged. And that simple thing of course you are. You know, you think yourself, you're an artist, you're making an art, you're an artist, of course, without, I guess, any caveats or any extras.
That's incredible. That's so beautiful. In a way, it's what you didn't get in your reading list at university. You then got to experience in real life with a network of supporters, role models, encouragement from peers, and that uplifted each other. It sounds like really incredible. Before we, I don't know, I'm enjoying talking to you so much, but before we get to the end of the interview, I very quickly wanted to also touch on your some of your concrete compositions. I listened to your Vancouver Island Suite or Island Suite. I don't know which title you decided on in the end.
I, it's still up. It's still up for debate. So
Okay.
I know
We'll
what you
do a
mean
little
by it.
poll at the end of the video. That was really beautiful, and a lot of it sounded very sort of almost onomatopoetic, you know, like the imitation of the, what was it, the tide pools, sort of the ebb and flow of the water, or the little crabs scurrying. It was really beautiful and spoke to me, and wanted to ask you if you could speak a bit about how perhaps surroundings, environment, all of that inspires your music that you're writing. And then also the other thing I found really interesting is that in your YouTube videos you had little blurbs of text that almost set the scene a little, but the texts were not in the musical score. I don't know if that was intentional or if you specifically wanted your musicians to approach the musical text without being too much sort of skewed in one direction by the blurb from the YouTube video.
Yeah, the program. Yeah, in the score, in the official score that's in the CMC library, those program notes are there.
Oh, okay.
Again, it was
I didn't see the whole score. Yeah.
it was an interesting situation because I was writing it for the specific event for the specific musicians, so they already knew. You know, it was like, and when we perform it, I get up and I read those program notes because the idea is to almost take someone on this little journey. It's in some ways the Vancouver Island Suite, which I end up calling it, is probably a really good example of my work and my inspiration. Each of the pieces is inspired by a local area. Tide pools is obviously our rocky coast. I love being out of doors. I love being on the water. I'm married to a marine biologist, so there's, and he's an avid bird watcher, and that we share that, and that's often been my inspiration. I mean, even you go back to my first piece with that I wrote for two flutes and a violin was ravens, because ravens in the north are incredible. They're everywhere. They're also around the world, and so a lot of my inspiration comes from those kinds of experiences and those kinds of. We have a small boat. We get out, and it's often in. I find my inspiration there, and I also have I have a visual visual connection to music. I often want to create a piece that is going to create an image for the listener, and it may not be exactly the same, but it will take them somewhere, and they'll have an idea of, you know, like tide pools. And when someone says, "Oh, yeah, I could see it," and it's like, okay, I've done my job. That's what I wanted to do. And it's sometimes it's a bit of a challenge because, and one of the things that doing these six pieces was how the place to some degree is stagnant because it's like a tide pool. At least the tide comes in and out. But when you're talking about beaches, it's a beach. What about this beach? It's just a beach, you know. Whereas music goes from A to B, it has to go somewhere. So I had to create for myself, in terms of working on the piece, an A to B. How am I approaching this? What's the story that goes with this? And then when it came down to actually presenting it, it was like, this is really important that this story is there. And that's probably pretty typical of my music. I'm not sure I've ever done anything, at least not for a very long time, that didn't actually have program notes. I'm going to say extensive program notes. They aren't necessarily that long, but that they're important. And I think they're important both for the performer as well as the audience, because I part of what I find as a composer is also I want to communicate. Part of why I write is I want to share this thing. And watching one of my pieces is actually called Chasing the Raven, which is for string quartet. And it comes from, if a raven will go through all the little birds, and if it's close to a nest, even if it's flying through, the little birds will come up and they'll chase it. And it's like, there's this raven, he's big, but it's these little birds, and they're just gonna go after him and hassle him until he moves through. And it's like, that's one of the things that I think I love to watch and I think is amazing, and so want to be able to convey that to an audience through using music, and that's often my inspiration.
And I think there's also at least one composition where there's a specific sort of environmental impetus. What was the title? I wrote it down somewhere. Once I Heard.
Once I heard, okay, I was,
Yeah.
yeah, that actually came from. I'm trying to remember exactly what it. Um, when I was young, growing up, one of the books we had in the bookshelf, actually at our cottage, was Silent Spring. Silent Spring was written because she was noticing that the songbirds were disappearing. And what was happening, it was the DDT that was being put on, the pesticides that were being put on the crops. Um, the birds were eating the insects were dying. And basically what she said was, what would happen if you walked out one spring day and there were no birds, that there were no birds singing? It was instrumental in changing our use of DDT. And then before I wrote that piece, there was an article about how many birds don't exist because habitat loss. I think climate change was part of it, obviously, but for a lot of reasons, that we're losing these birds. And it was like worldwide, I want to say 7 billion. It might not be that much, but it was big. It was like a lot of birds aren't there because of the things that we're doing. And so Once I Heard was a bit of my reaction to that same idea. And the lyrics are mine. And the lyrics very much are saying, you know, I used to, once I heard a robin, once I heard a sparrow. And the idea being is I don't anymore, that they aren't there. And trying to get this feeling of, we could lose this. If we don't pay attention, we could lose this. Probably also comes out of my love for the environment and my love for the forests and the ocean and the lakes and the birds and our wildlife.
Yeah. Well, to sort of finish us off, what is your hope for classical music, for music in general, music composition, women in music, women composers? What do you hope will the future bring?
Okay, let me think. I actually think we've been going in the right direction. I think the internet the internet has enabled us to do this, which is, when you step back and think about it, is quite amazing. Because you're in Oxford, I'm in Victoria, and we're having this conversation. The ability to hear new music, it's out there. It takes a little bit of looking. But it's on YouTube, there are all kinds of forums. When I was a student, when you tried to pick up a recording of new music, it was really hard. You had to live in a big center. So I think that's been a real boost. It's also creates a downside. It creates a difficulty in that a lot of those decisions are being made for us in terms of finding new music, and that quite often new is based on what you've just listened to as opposed to try this. This is really, yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, the possibility is there. I mean, I'm sure it's, you could have a program that would do something like that. That, yeah, try this. You might like it. You might not like it. I'd like. I'd also like to see more encouragement of live performances that are easily accessible. One of the things that happened is that when I became a composer and started, I've had a piece played in the festival in Vancouver for a number of years. They were amazing. They are the Sonic Boom Festival. It's just, yeah. But it meant that my husband suddenly didn't have a lot of experience with new music, other than what I had been writing. But we would go to these concerts. They wouldn't, reasonable attendance, particularly for new music. But he would go. It was like it opened up a whole world, and he'd love reading the program notes, and he'd love it, and it just opened it up. And it's just, how do you get? I would like to see more exposure on more of this idea of try it out, and the idea too that you don't have to go to a concert and like everything on the program. Go to a concert, and if there will be something that you really like or that you really love, and there might be a few things that you kind of go but that's part of the experience. And I don't know how we get that across, or how we get that experience to a lot of people that aren't necessarily out looking for it. And I don't know, it's a struggle, but I think that there's a lot of energy. I'd like to think that we've learned that we need to support the arts, that they are really important, and they aren't important. You can't add it to your GBP. You can't. It's part of quality of life, and it's part of connecting communities, and it's important, and we can't keep brushing it aside like it's some kind of frill that we don't need in real life. And I think we have to just keep trying. We have to get our voices heard. I think things like this are really good. I think the things that you're doing and studying and going, okay, talk to me. Who are you? What are you doing? And I think more and more of this, and the more we can use the tools, and it's going to have to be younger generation, because I'm older, and this technical stuff, and I'm not doing too badly, but still, figuring out how to use it so it really is helpful and isn't a detriment, and it's a benefit to the art form and not a detriment to the art form. And that's what I hope.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and you've had such an interesting and fascinating pathway through music to composition, as a performer, as a teacher, as a composer. And I hope I get to hear a lot more of your music going forwards. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think it's great what you're doing, and it's been fun. I've really enjoyed it.
I'm glad, so have I.